They told me to pack my things and leave because my sister needed more space. In that moment, I realized my worth in this family was less than the furniture they rearranged. I stood outside with my suitcase, pretending I was fine, but inside I was crumbling. I thought the worst was being unwanted, until the bank called me first. The account my parents and sister relied on was in my name, and with one phone call, I went from disposable daughter to the one holding every card. They kicked me out, but I held the key to everything. I grew up believing my family was picture perfect. At least, that was the story they told the world. Our house gleamed like it belonged in a magazine. Our Sunday dinners were always staged with silverware polished until you could see your reflection, and our family portraits hung in the living room like trophies. Strangers thought we were close, loving, and unbreakable. But beneath the glossy finish, there was a truth I could never admit to anyone. I was always the extra piece, the daughter who never quite fit the frame. Claire, my older sister, was the golden child. From the time we were little, she was praised for everything: her grades, her smile, her charm. If she so much as breathed, my parents clapped. I, on the other hand, learned early that my efforts didn't shine as brightly. Even when I excelled, my accomplishments were brushed aside as expected. When Claire was accepted into an Ivy League, my parents threw a party. When I landed my first steady job, they barely looked up from their wine glasses. One evening, not long before my eviction from my own home, we sat down to dinner. Claire had just returned from a work trip, and my parents were glowing with pride as she described meetings in boardrooms I couldn't imagine. I slid into a chair at the dining table, my usual spot, but my mother stiffened. "You're in Claire's seat, darling," she said, voice firm yet coated in false sweetness. I froze, fork halfway to my plate. "This has always been my seat." "Not anymore," my father cut in. "Claire deserves the head of the table. Move down, Maddie." I shifted, cheeks burning. Claire didn't even look at me. Instead, she flashed the faintest smile as though she had just won a silent competition I didn't know I was part of. That night, I couldn't finish my food. The air was too thick with invisible chains. A week later, the conversation that would shatter everything came. My parents called me into the living room, their voices unusually serious. "We've been thinking," my father began, folding his hands. "Claire and Michael are moving back in with the kids. They need the space." I blinked. "What about me?" Mother tilted her head as if I had asked a ridiculous question. "Sweetheart, you're single. You don't need as much room. You'll manage." The words struck harder than I expected. My chest tightened, and I forced a smile even as my heart cracked. "So you're asking me to leave?" My father shook his head, but his eyes told the truth. "It's temporary. Just until they get settled." Temporary. I knew better. I had seen this pattern my whole life, Claire needing something and me being asked to shrink. My entire existence had been one long rehearsal for this moment. I nodded because arguing never changed anything. That night, I packed my belongings into 2 suitcases. The house I had grown up in, the walls that had absorbed my laughter and my tears, no longer belonged to me. As I dragged my suitcase to the door, I heard my mother's voice drift from the kitchen. "Finally, Claire can have the house she deserves," she whispered, unaware that my ears caught every syllable. Claire chuckled. "It's about time." The door shut behind me, the click louder than any scream. I rented a small apartment across town. It smelled faintly of mildew, and the heater clanged like broken bells, but it was mine. Or at least I told myself that. Each night, I lay in the narrow bed and scrolled through the pictures my family posted online. Smiling faces around the dinner table, my chair now filled by Claire. Captions about family first that felt like knives under my ribs. I wanted to hate them, but hate requires a kind of passion I no longer had the energy to give. Instead, I felt hollow, like the world had peeled me away layer by layer until nothing remained but silence. Still, there were moments when I remembered who I had been before. I would catch myself recalling my father once calling me his little princess before Claire's crown was forged. I would remember the nights my mother braided my hair while humming softly. Were those memories lies, or had they once been real before Claire's shadow consumed the light? I wasn't sure. One rainy evening, I sat in my apartment with the sound of water dripping from a leak in the ceiling. My phone buzzed. It was an email from the bank. My heart sank, assuming it was just another notice about bills or debt. I opened it reluctantly, and my breath caught. Account holder, Madeline Evans. Immediate attention required. My name. Not theirs, mine. I reread it, the letters glowing on the screen like a secret I wasn't supposed to know. Confusion tangled with fear. What account? Why me? And then a memory hit. The way my parents often dismissed me when finances were mentioned. The way they said, "Don't worry about it, Maddie. We'll handle it." But what if they hadn't been handling it at all? What if they had been using me all along? I closed the laptop, heart pounding. The walls of my tiny apartment felt like they were closing in. Everything I thought I knew about my place in this family had already collapsed, and yet I could feel something rising in the rubble, something I couldn't quite name. Was it anger? Was it power? Or was it the first spark of freedom? The silence of my new apartment was different from the silence of my childhood home. There, silence had always meant judgment, my parents withholding approval, Claire's smirk hovering in the air like smoke. Here, silence was emptier, heavier, and yet it carried a strange kind of clarity. I could finally hear my own thoughts, and they weren't kind. I scrolled through social media, a masochistic habit I couldn't break. Post after post from my family appeared on the screen, smiling faces around the same table I had once claimed as mine. Claire seated at the head where I had been told to move. Captions read, "Family dinners are the best," and "So proud of my daughter Claire, the star of the family." My name was absent. Even when I spotted myself in the background of old photos, I was cropped out or blurred. At first, I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe the pictures were just framed that way. But then I noticed the patterns. Every photo, every gathering, every update, it was as though I had never existed. One night, Claire posted a picture of her children playing in the yard I had once mowed every weekend growing up. The caption said, "So grateful to raise my family in the house I grew up in. Home is where love lives." Home. Love. Words that sliced me open. I closed my phone and pressed my palms to my eyes as though I could block out the image burned into my mind. The next morning, my inbox held another blow, an email from the bank. Urgent, marked in red. A loan account was overdue, but the name listed as guarantor wasn't Claire's or my parents'. It was mine. Confusion surged through me like ice water. I didn't remember signing for any loan. My hands shook as I scrolled through the details. Credit card balances, home equity withdrawals, late fees, all tied to my name. I tried to breathe, tried to convince myself it was a mistake. I called the bank, my voice trembling as I spelled out my social security number. After a long silence, the representative said, "Yes, Ms. Evans, the account is under your name. Are you disputing the charges?" My stomach turned. I never opened these accounts. The representative's tone softened. "You might want to check with family members. Sometimes these things happen within households." Sigh. Within households. The polite translation for betrayal. I hung up and sat in the quiet, the room spinning. My family hadn't just erased me from photos. They had tied me to debts I hadn't created. I thought of every time they'd told me not to worry about finances, that they would handle it. They had handled it all right, by handing it to me. For days, I drifted between anger and despair. I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but the thought of facing their dismissive stares made me shrink. Instead, I retreated further into myself, isolating, letting their voices echo in my head. "You're single. You don't need space. You're less important. You'll manage." And I believed them. Then, a message lit up my phone. A text from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. "Maddie, there's something you need to know about your family. Call me." I hesitated, staring at the words. Part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend nothing more could be revealed, but curiosity gnawed at me stronger than fear. I dialed the number. Her voice was hesitant, cautious. "I don't know if you're aware, but your parents used your name to cover their credit for years. Everyone in town whispers about it. They said you agreed to help." "Did you?" My throat tightened. "No, I didn't even know." A pause. "Then they lied to you too." When I hung up, I sank into the couch, shaking. The betrayal was no longer just suspicion. It was confirmed truth. My family had made me their scapegoat, not only emotionally, but financially. That night, I dreamed of drowning. The water pressed against my chest, and above me I could see Claire's hand holding me down, my parents' faces blurred in the shadows. I woke, gasping, heart hammering, tears wetting my pillow. Days turned into weeks. I avoided calls from my family, but the messages they left on my voicemail were filled with subtle guilt. My mother's voice was syrupy, almost kind. "Sweetheart, I hope you're doing okay. Remember, family comes first." Family comes first, except when that family throws you out like old furniture and uses your name as collateral. One evening, I found myself walking by the old house. Lights glowed in every window, laughter spilling out as though the walls themselves were mocking me. I stood in the shadows, watching Claire through the glass, her children playing at her feet. My father's hand rested proudly on her shoulder. My mother leaned in, smiling. I was a ghost on the outside, invisible to the family I had once called mine. For a moment, I almost convinced myself to walk away forever, to leave them to their illusions. But then, as I turned to go, I heard my father's voice through the cracked window. "Don't worry, Claire. Everything we've built will be yours. Madeline doesn't matter." The words struck like a blade. I stumbled back, pressing a hand against the cold air. I thought I had already reached the bottom, but I was wrong. They hadn't just pushed me aside, they had erased me completely. And somewhere in the hollowness, a spark ignited. Small, fragile, but alive. The text from my friend lingered in my mind like an echo I couldn't silence. I replayed our conversation over and over, each repetition cutting deeper. My family had used me. They had built their comfortable life on my name, my credit, my sacrifices, all while convincing me I was a burden. The confirmation should have filled me with rage, but instead it hollowed me out. For days, I walked through life in a fog, unable to focus at work, unable to eat more than a few bites. My body felt heavy, as if I carried every lie my parents had told me. The breaking point came on a night I'll never forget. I had been in a minor car accident, nothing catastrophic, but enough to leave me with a bruised arm and a hospital bill I couldn't afford. Desperate, I swallowed my pride and called my parents. "Dad, something happened," I said, my voice trembling. "The hospital bill," he interrupted, sighing heavily. "Madeline, we can't always carry you. You need to be responsible for yourself." "Carry me?" I whispered, stunned. "You've been carrying me?" "Of course," he said sharply. "Your sister has a family to think of. We've already given you more than enough." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him about the accounts in my name, about the debts I never created, but the words stuck in my throat. I hung up before I could beg. That was the moment I realized there was no bottom to their betrayal. I had been holding on to a fantasy that somewhere, deep down, they still loved me, still valued me. But love doesn't abandon you in the moment you need it most. I sat in the sterile light of my apartment, the hospital bracelet still around my wrist, and felt the last fragile thread of innocence snap. A few days later, the second blow landed. Claire's voice filled the room, not in person but through the glowing screen of my phone. She had posted another update, a smiling photo with her husband, champagne glasses raised high. The caption read, "Some people never grow up. They expect the world to carry them while they do nothing. I refuse to enable laziness anymore. Family should uplift, not drag down." The comments were filled with praise, people calling her strong, admirable, a role model. And though my name wasn't written, everyone who knew us understood. She was talking about me. The shame was suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in, and I sank to the floor, sobbing into my hands. My chest ached with a grief so sharp it felt like a physical wound. I stopped answering calls, stopped leaving the apartment except when absolutely necessary. Food piled up untouched in the fridge, my clothes gathered dust on the chair. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the thought of disappearing creeping closer and closer. One night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of despair pressing me down. The idea of ending it all whispered in my ear, promising peace, silence, an escape from the endless ache of rejection. I stared at the bottle of pills on the nightstand, my hands trembling. But before I could reach for them, a sound broke the silence. A notification ping from my laptop. It was another email from the bank. I almost ignored it, too exhausted to care. But something compelled me to open it. Account holder, Madeline Evans, please confirm next steps regarding your property. Property. My eyes widened. I read the message twice, then a third time. According to their records, the house my family now lived in, the very house they had pushed me out of, was still tied legally to me. My name was there, in black and white, undeniable. I sat frozen, heart racing, tears streaming down my face. In the depths of my despair, the universe had handed me a shard of truth, sharp enough to cut through the lies I'd been told. My parents and Claire hadn't just used my credit. They had built their empire on foundations that belonged to me. The house they flaunted online, the dinners they staged, the life they claimed as their own, it was balanced precariously on my signature, my name. The weight of that realization slammed into me. Anger surged hot and wild, colliding with grief until I was shaking. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something other than despair. I felt power, however fragile, however faint. I lay awake all night, my mind racing with memories. Every dismissal, every smirk, every word of gaslighting. I replayed them, but this time the narrative shifted. I wasn't the weak one. I wasn't the burden. I had been the scaffolding holding them up all along. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror. My reflection startled me. Sunken eyes, pale skin, a woman worn thin by betrayal. But behind that broken surface, I saw something else flicker. Resolve. The innocence of believing my family loved me unconditionally was gone. What replaced it was raw, aching clarity. And though I hadn't yet decided what to do, I knew one thing with certainty. I could never go back. This was the point of no return. The email from the bank lingered in my mind for days, a glowing ember in the ashes of my despair. Each time I reread the words, account holder, Madeline Evans, the weight inside me shifted. What once had been suffocating grief began to feel like something else. Power. For weeks, I had been drowning in the story my family had written for me, the failure, the burden, the forgotten daughter. But now I saw the cracks in their narrative. The truth was undeniable. They had depended on me all along, built their life on my name, and convinced me I was nothing while quietly standing on my shoulders. The fury that once ate me alive began to glow like fire in the dark. It wasn't blind rage anymore. It was focused, sharp. I opened my laptop and searched late into the night. I devoured articles about narcissistic family structures, about scapegoating children, about financial abuse within households. Each word felt like a mirror reflecting my life back at me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. The patterns were real, and I had been living in them my whole life. I didn't just want to know the truth. I needed to arm myself with it. I ordered books on family systems, highlighted passages about emotional manipulation, and underlined every phrase that echoed my own experience. Knowledge became my armor. Each fact, another layer of protection against their lies. And then, one afternoon, I gathered the courage to meet with a lawyer. I handed over the documents I had received from the bank, my hands trembling as I pushed the folder across the polished desk. He leafed through the papers, brow furrowing deeper with each page. When he finally looked up, his eyes held a seriousness that made my heart pound. "Madeline," he said slowly, "you do realize what this means, don't you? If you choose to act, that house, the one your family is living in, it could legally be yours." The room spun for a moment. My family's sanctuary, their symbol of pride, the stage for every photograph, every lie. It wasn't theirs at all. It was mine. I walked out of his office into the sunlight, my body trembling. The warmth on my skin felt different now, less like a distant comfort and more like a promise. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen by myself, if no one else. That night, I spread the documents across my kitchen table. Emails from the bank, records of loans, every shred of evidence I could find. I built piles, labeled folders, created timelines. It was tedious, but it was also intoxicating. For once, I wasn't reacting to their cruelty. I was building my own story. Days turned into weeks. I stopped checking their social media, stopped torturing myself with images of their curated happiness. My energy was redirected. Instead of crying into the silence, I filled it with strategy. I documented every fraudulent loan, every credit card tied to my name. I created backups of backups, storing files on hard drives and in the cloud. It was my secret war, and I was winning before the first battle had even begun. Still, there were moments when the weight pressed down again, when exhaustion crept in like a shadow. On those days, I walked to the park near my apartment. I would sit on a bench beneath the trees, watching sunlight spill through the leaves. The air smelled clean, untainted by lies. Children laughed in the distance, strangers walked their dogs, and for a moment, I wasn't the discarded daughter or the scapegoat. I was simply Madeline, a woman breathing freely under her own sky. On one of those afternoons, I tilted my head back and let the breeze brush against my face. For the first time, I thought, this life is mine. Not borrowed, not conditional, not something granted to me by the approval of others. Mine. The peace lingered even as I walked home, my steps lighter than they had been in months. I opened the door to my apartment, ready to dive back into my files, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire. "Madeline, I need to see you. It's urgent." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. My sister never reached out to me, not unless she wanted something. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. I knew, deep in my gut, that this was not a reconciliation. It was the next move in a game I hadn't asked to play. And for the first time, I smiled, because this time I wasn't walking into her trap blind. The invitation arrived wrapped in gold paper, as if excess could disguise desperation. My parents were hosting a gala dinner at one of the city's most prestigious restaurants to celebrate Claire's accomplishments. The words felt like a dagger, but I accepted. Not because I wanted to be there, but because the stage they had built for themselves would soon become the perfect stage for truth. The restaurant was opulent, chandeliers dripping light like diamonds, tables covered in silk linens. Guests gathered in sparkling dresses and tailored suits, clinking glasses and showering Claire with admiration. She glowed in the center, her smile wide, her voice carrying above the music. To anyone else, she was a woman on top of the world. To me, she was a queen built on stolen bricks. I stayed at the back, unnoticed at first. It was easier that way, to let their pride swell, to let the illusion reach its highest point before I shattered it. Speeches were made. My father raised his glass, his voice strong and proud. To Claire, the daughter who makes us proud every single day. To family, the foundation of everything. The words nearly made me laugh, but I held it in, my lips pressed tight. Dinner was served. Course after course, wine flowing freely, laughter booming from their table. I watched, patient, waiting for the inevitable. And then, as the last plates were cleared and the check discreetly delivered, the moment arrived. The waiter placed the bill before my father. With a confident smile, he slid his card into the folder. Minutes later, the waiter returned, his polite smile strained. "I'm sorry, sir, but this card has been declined." A ripple of surprise crossed my father's face. "That's impossible. Try another." He offered another card, then my mother's, then Claire's. Each time, the waiter returned with the same words: "Declined." The room shifted. Guests glanced at each other, whispers beginning to stir. My father's voice grew sharper. "There must be a mistake." The waiter cleared his throat. "There is no mistake, sir. The accounts linked to these cards have been frozen." Claire's face paled, her smile cracking. My mother clutched her pearls as though they might save her. Chaos erupted at their table, their voices overlapping in a storm of panic. And then the manager appeared, his voice calm but cutting through the noise. "Excuse me, there is only one person authorized to resolve this matter, the sole account holder of the Evans estate." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Madeline Evans." Heads turned. Dozens of eyes swung in my direction, widening as they realized I had been there all along. I stepped forward, each stride steady, my heels clicking against marble like a metronome. The whispers grew. "Madeline? She's the one?" I stopped at the table, meeting their stunned faces. Claire's lips trembled. "Maddie, please, don't do this. We're sisters." Her voice cracked, desperate now, stripped of the confidence she wore like armor. My mother reached for me, her eyes glistening. "Sweetheart, you can't abandon us. We're family." Even my father's tone softened, frantic. "We did what we had to. Don't let it end like this. You can't walk away." I looked at them, really looked. The same people who had pushed me out of my own home, who had erased me from their lives, who had stolen my name to pay their debts. And now they wanted mercy. My voice was quiet, but it carried. "I am not abandoning you. I am simply ending the lie I've been forced to live. I am done feeding the injustice you built on me." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Claire's tears smudged her mascara. My mother's hands shook. My father's face collapsed into something I had never seen before: fear. The guests stared, their faces filled with shock, confusion, even recognition. The illusion of the perfect Evans family shattered before their eyes. I turned, not waiting for another plea. As I walked away, the room buzzed, whispers filling the air. So it was her all along. She was the one keeping them afloat. Madeline Evans. The words followed me out into the night, not as an accusation, but as a revelation. For the first time, my name carried weight. Not as the forgotten daughter, not as the scapegoat, but as the woman who had taken back her power. The cool air met my skin as I stepped outside, the city lights flickering around me. Behind me, the house of cards had finally collapsed. Ahead of me, the path was mine alone. In the days that followed the dinner, the whispers spread faster than wildfire. What had once been a carefully curated image of perfection was now exposed for what it truly was: a hollow performance propped up by lies. Friends who once gushed over Claire's success stopped answering her calls. Relatives who had always sung my parents' praises now looked at them with narrowed eyes, suspicion replacing admiration. I didn't need to lift a finger. Their downfall unfolded naturally, each truth unraveling the story they had spun for years. The golden child lost her glow. Claire tried desperately to reclaim it, posting even more photographs online, writing captions about resilience and family bonds. But the comments beneath her posts told a different story. People saw through it now. The cracks were too wide to conceal. My parents fared no better. The truth about the debts in my name, the fraudulent loans, the manipulation, all of it seeped out piece by piece. A neighbor whispered to another, a colleague mentioned it at a gathering, and soon everyone knew. Their reputation collapsed under the weight of their own greed. Where once they commanded respect, now they were greeted with pity, or worse, with contempt. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't parade my victory. I didn't need to. Justice was playing out without my interference, like gravity pulling down what was never meant to stand. Still, One quiet morning as I drank coffee by the window of my apartment, a new email notification appeared. It was from the bank. My breath caught as I clicked it open. "Congratulations, Ms. Evans. Your assets have been secured and your property portfolio has shown substantial growth." I leaned back in my chair, the words washing over me. It wasn't just confirmation of my financial security. It was symbolic. The life they had tried to strip from me was thriving in my hands. But wealth wasn't what I wanted most. What I wanted was peace. For months, I had been trapped in their narrative, battling their voices in my head. Now, those voices were fading, replaced with my own. I began to write again, something I hadn't done since college. At first, it was just in a private journal, raw thoughts about being the forgotten child, the scapegoat, the one never chosen. But soon, I realized these words weren't just mine. They belonged to countless others who had lived the same story. So I started a blog. The first post was titled, "The Invisible Daughter." I wrote about the small humiliations, the subtle comparisons, the silent erasures that add up to a lifetime of being unseen. I hit publish, expecting little, but within days, messages poured in. Strangers wrote, "This is my story too." Others thanked me, saying they finally had the words for what they had endured. It grew beyond anything I imagined. What began as therapy became a beacon. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was transforming my pain into purpose. One afternoon, as I typed another entry, sunlight streamed through the window, warming the pages of my notebook. I paused, looking around my apartment, the plants I'd nurtured, the shelves lined with books I had chosen, the photographs of friends who had become my chosen family. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, every detail chosen with intention. For the first time, the air didn't feel heavy. My chest didn't ache with longing. Instead, a quiet joy settled over me. I smiled without realizing it, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. I thought of my parents, of Claire. For years, I had believed they held the power to define me, to grant or deny my worth. Now I knew better. Their downfall wasn't my victory, my freedom was. The best revenge was never about watching them collapse. It was about stepping beyond them, building a life they could neither touch nor destroy. That night, I wrote my final blog entry in the series that told my story. It ended with the words, "The best revenge is not to destroy them, but to live free beyond them." As I typed the last sentence, I felt something shift inside me, a closing of an old chapter and the opening of something vast and untamed. I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was simply Madeline Evans, whole, unbroken, and finally free.